on the Evolution World of Sacred Device episode, I talked about how few RPGs were truly available on the Dreamcast, especially in its first year. One I was really looking forward to, for how strongly people reacted to a tease of its appearance, is a game from a developer called Birthday. A game that was released on the absolute final day of the 1990s. Erupting into Zero Hour for the fears of Y2K comes a story of humanity in the wake of mysterious technological ruin. A game called Elemental Gimmick Gear. The company Birthday Limited was a small developer from Japan who had nearly exclusively released a smattering of Japan-only turn-based fantasy role-playing games, like Daikaiju Monogatari and a Super Famicom port of Dungeon Explorer 2, which was retitled Crystal Beans in Japan. Elemental Gimmick Gear was their first release in the Western world, as well as their first entreaty into the modern console generations. Their first take on a three-dimensional game. But whereas a lot of companies dived headlong into the polygonal graphic market, Birthday took a more baby steps approach, just dipping in a couple toes. E.G.G. does not particularly require the power of the Dreamcast hardware, as it presents primarily as rich, gorgeous, two-dimensional animation, and only switches to 3D for a handful of one-on-one battles. This might sound a lot like Evolution as far as structure goes, since it also went from hand-drawn to computer-generated during battles. But the most unexpected thing about Elemental Gimmick Gear, based on its reputation, is it's not really an RPG. At least, not an RPG like Evolution is an RPG. It's an action RPG, not turn-based, and there isn't any system for leveling up, other than collecting handfuls of capsules for different types of skill. Obtaining these and defeating individual bosses in these worlds is the primary mode of advancement, and functionally, it's more Mega Man than it is Final Fantasy. Usually in action RPGs, that means that the combat is the star, but that really isn't the case here either. The hand-to-hand melee combat, especially in the first hour or so of the game, is honestly disastrously bad. And I died a bunch of times trying to battle regular, minor opponents just wandering around the terrain. But once you obtain the ability to spin like a top, the game opens its joys to you. And being able to just barrel into people at top speed and bump them to death never stopped being satisfying. To the point that I leaned on it constantly, even when I had more powerful attacks at my disposal. My favorite detail is that the game allows you to maintain a spin through different rooms, so you can enter a room, get a feel for where the enemies are, walk back out, start spinning, and re-enter the room, pinballing everyone to death. It rules. The actual plot to this game is pretty muddled and unimportant, in what I have to imagine was a pretty rough translation from Japanese. Scientists discovered an egg-shaped robot while investigating some jungle ruins, and discover a sleeping man inside. They discover the machine is over 5,000 years old and nickname it the E.G.G, or Elemental Gimmick Gear. You play the sleeping man, who the characters call the Sleeper. You don't remember anything, and your E.G.G is so much older than everyone else's that it's commented on regularly. The ruin suddenly activates, and a holographic face emerges named Psycho Mother, which brings forth a horde of monsters and robots. The area around the ruins got named Fogna because it's foggy. There's an evil gang of robots whose leader lives in a place called Metal Heaven. You start getting premonitions of your past life and name and existence. There's all kinds of stuff going on. None of that really matters when you're blasting loser insects with your spin powers, but honestly, other than that spin, the game's focus is much more on puzzle solving than combat. Structurally, it does still resemble a dungeon crawler, and whether it's trying to freeze water fast enough to run across it, walk across colored floor tiles in the right order, or time things right to get through a series of closing gates, This is clearly where the designer's interests lie. Even the little boss battles, the one that transition into 3D, are not particularly engaging, and the game not restoring your full health if you die during these fights was a regular source of annoyance. My favorite bit was that I discovered that the most reliable way to get upgrades and prizes is inexplicably to have to repeatedly save one specific child in the same room, who keeps falling behind a giant rock pile away from his worried mother. There's basically no narrative justification for it, but it keeps happening, and it's so funny. Back on the Shadow Man episode, I talked about not feeling particularly engaged with that game's characters, settings, or combat, but still enjoying myself because its spooky Deathside vibes were so cool. E.G.G. kinda runs along the same lines, where the game holds together better as a whole than as the sum of its parts. I didn't really like the combat all that much, I didn't care about the story, I didn't really engage with a lot of the puzzles, I disliked the boss battles. But the vibes here are immaculate, and I just enjoyed spending time in this world. It's gorgeously designed, the soundtrack features this repetitive but charming little earworm, and it was just chill. It wasn't asking a ton of me, and it felt so lived in, even if it couldn't quite explain it to me coherently. I can absolutely see Elemental Gimmick Gear being, if it catches you at the right age, a game that you never forget. Next time, Mom! Hang up the telephone! I gotta impress my snake friend!